This show is produced by the Harwood Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris, and we love making this show available to you free of charge. If you'd like to help us keep it that way, make a contribution to our Karma Jar or become a show sponsor. To learn more, visit our website. Today I'm making the ultimate caramel apple. Now if you'd like to follow along with the recipe, grab your smartphone and scan the QR code here on the screen and the recipe will pop right up. Well, when Halloween starts coming around, everybody starts craving caramel apples, but these really are the ultimate caramel apple. We dip them in caramel, then chocolate, and nuts. They're fantastic for sharing and great to give as gifts. Now before we start dipping our apples, you'll want to get a little tray of some kind. Put a piece of wax paper or parchment in the bottom and then get your cooking or baking spray and you'll want to spritz that parchment. Caramel is really sticky and we want to make sure that that releases off this parchment once it's cooled down. Next you'll want to get 4 apples. Now I like for these apples to use a Fuji apple, but you can use whatever kind you'd like. You'll want to wash them really well and make sure they're really dry. Now on some of the stores that carry these giant apples, they're like about this big and they're huge. But when you're covering them with caramel and chocolate, I think a nice medium-sized apple is perfect. So I have 4 of these. I'll set these on my sheet. And then I have 4 popsicle sticks, and these are just little wooden sticks. You could also use any other kind of stick that you have, like a lollipop stick or something like that. You'll want to put it into the stem end about halfway into the apple so that it's nice and secure. You don't want to go all the way to the bottom of the apple, just about halfway. And then we're going to set this aside. Now the first thing we'll dip our apples in is the caramel, so let's make that sauce. In a microwave-proof bowl, I have 14 ounces of caramels, and to that I'll add 2 tablespoons of water. Now I'm going to put this in the microwave on 30-second bursts, stirring after each period until the caramels are all nice and melted. Now this has been about 2 minutes in the microwave. You can see it's really warm. So I'm taking my little spatula and I'm mixing that water into the caramel because I need it to thin out the caramels just a little bit. And because the bowl is so nice and warm, that just by stirring this, it will really melt nicely. It is important that you get all of the caramel lumps out. So if you feel like it needs another maybe 10 or 15 seconds, you can pop it back in. But I'm finding that the heat of the bowl and the heat of the rest of the caramel is melting this pretty nicely. There we go. Now for our first layer, we'll need our caramel, our apples, and then 3/4 cup of chopped nuts. Now I'm using a chopped walnut, but you could use a pecan or an almond, whatever you like. And here's how we're going to dip. We take the apple, place it into the caramel, you kind of roll it around. And a lot of times you'd be tempted to put it right back on the sheet, but don't. We want to let this caramel start to cool a little bit. And if I were to immediately put it upside down, it will start to pool at the bottom, and I really don't want it to do that. So I'm actually going to hold one in this hand while I get the other one rolling. I'm going to let it kind of just turn it around so that I can kind of control where that caramel goes. And it will start to cool as it's in the air. Now you can start to see on this one the caramel is still moving, but on this one it's not so much anymore. And once I see that it's sort of stopped moving, I'm going to take this one and dip just the bottom into the nuts. And then I'll place it on my tray. And those nuts make a nice buffer so the caramel is not right on the parchment. Again, it's that stick factor. Now I have a little bit of caramel left in my bowl. So I'm going to take and just spoon some right up against the stick, and it will just sort of spread itself. And now I'm going to pop these in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes to get that caramel set up, and then we'll drizzle with chocolate. Now right before I take the apples out of the refrigerator, I'm going to melt 3/4 of a cup of semi-sweet chocolate, but to that I'm going to add 1 teaspoon, which is just a little bit, of a solid vegetable shortening like Crisco. And the reason I'm doing this is that helps that chocolate get just a little bit harder, which is important on these apples. So I'll put this in the microwave on 30-second bursts until that chocolate is nice and melted. Now remember, when we're melting chocolate in the microwave, we don't want to overheat it. So this bowl is pretty warm after just a minute, and I'll just take my spoon. As I move the chocolate pieces around in the bottom of the bowl, they're going to melt even more. If you overheat chocolate, it can seize up on you, which means it gets like really hard and kind of contracts, and it's really hard to work with, sometimes even impossible. So let's use the heat of the bowl to melt our chocolate. And now we add it to our apples. So they've come out of the refrigerator. You can see they end up pooling a little bit, but that's okay. What we don't want is all of the caramel dripping off. And in fact, look at how easily they come off the sheet because of doing that spray. Now, if you have some little areas of caramel that are exposed, if you want to dip those bottoms in the nuts a little bit more, you certainly can. And now we're going to drizzle our chocolate. I just use my spoon, and I get a spoonful of chocolate. And again, I want to start kind of at the top, and then I just drizzle it all along the top there, and it will start to fall onto the sides. That's just gravity working for us there. And then once I have a little bit of chocolate there at the top and it started to drizzle down, I'll take a smaller little spoonful and I'll just kind of wiggle it back and forth, kind of towards where the apple starts to curve. I don't want a lot of chocolate in my spoon then, because it makes it harder to control. But this just gets a little bit more on the apple. And the chocolate has cooled a little bit as it's been sitting out here in the air, so it's less likely to, drip all the way down the apple. And the rest of our nuts, so I'm going to sprinkle some on the tops. We have some already on the bottom. And then I just try to place a few on the sides if I can. Now these go back in the refrigerator for 1 hour. Now after an hour in the refrigerator, you can see the chocolate is hardened up beautifully and these are ready to eat. Now you could certainly just pick it up by a stick and eat it like this. At my house we like to cut it into sections, and one of these will serve the 3 of us, which works out pretty nicely. But if you did want to give it as a gift, let me show you how you can do that. Over here I have a piece of my plastic wrap, and I've cut just a little square of parchment that's about the size of the base of my apple. And I'm going to take and just put a quick little spritz on that parchment, and I'll set it right in the middle of my plastic wrap and then take my apple, put it in the middle, and then I'll gather the sides up around the stick. And then I just have some raffia, but you could use ribbon if you like. And just tie that up. And just kind of flare the plastic up. And that makes a really great gift. Now you will want to keep these apples stored in the refrigerator because we want to keep the apple nice and fresh as well as the caramel and the chocolate. Well, if you'd like to make one of these ultimate caramel apples at home, just go to our website and go to the Sweet World show notes and I'll have the recipe there for you. Don't forget to join us on Facebook, and as always, if you have any ideas or questions for me, please send me an email. I'll see you next time.